Hi everyone, Armoured Pants here, and I have another video for you. In the German line is the Tier 6 light tank, the VK2801. Now firstly I must apologise because I thought I had done this review before, but it turns out I hadn't. One of my subscribers pointed out that it's missing from the German line. I think the problem was that I shot a couple of mastery games and I used them in the light tank guide and then forgot to actually do the actual guide for this tank itself, so I do apologise for that, but better late than never. We'll have a look at the tech spec and we'll have a look at blitzhanger.com to do that. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about this tank, because this tank is a tank that a lot of people really like. It's a tank which a lot of people really want to get. And you know, one of the first videos I ever watched on Blitz was a Bushka video where he said this is one of the best tanks in the game, and he had like a 74% win rate on or something like that. But unfortunately since then it's been power creeped. It is the victim of power creep. The introduction of new tanks have effectively reduced its effectiveness. It also has been nerfed as well. If we look at the time period since that Bushka video years ago, it's been nerfed like a bastard, basically. I mean, they've nerfed the speed, the rate of fire, the armor, and of course this has a double whammy effect, because while they've been nerfing this tank, other tanks around it, even tech tree tanks, have been gotten a lot of buffs and become a lot stronger. So if you look at the VK2601 in its own tier is a perfect example. Its armor buff really makes it a formidable opponent and far more competitive against this tank than it would have been heretofore. Then you've got the introduction of some monster tanks like the Smasher that didn't exist when this tank first came to the fore. The Dracula, the Helsing, the Lycan, they're all tanks that have been introduced that this tank now comes up against when it's up tiered. That's just to name a few of them. And these tanks really just make this tank far less effective than it was. So it's still a decent tank, but it's far less effective than it was many moons ago. But therefore, should I get the tank? Well, yes, you should get the tank, because it's a great tank for learning light tank play, spotting and scouting, and the key skills. And by the way, if you haven't looked at the light tank guide that we have on channel, which features that VK2801 mastery game, then you should, because you will need to understand the role of a light tank if you want to play this tank effectively, but also other light tanks as you move up through the tiers. So please have a look at that, and I'm going to put a link to that light tank guide in the description, because light tank guides are very different to other tank types. There's things you have to do, spotting, scouting, etc., and you're basically the eyes of the team, and if you don't do your role, then your team will suffer and you're unlikely to win. You know, a really inexperienced light tank player is one you see trying to push a heavy tank up a hill, because that's not your role. Now, looking at the tech spec for the tank, I would run chocolate bar and pure fuel to max out the performance of this tank. I would also, in terms of equipment, run supercharged gun rammer and vertical stabilizer. Why? Because you need to fire as often as you can. You're also going to snipe sometimes in this tank, and you're going to fire when you're moving. So I think those three things are the best. There are three gun options. There's two 75mm guns, and there is one 105mm derp gun, which we will put aside for the moment. We'll look at that later on, but forget about it for the moment, because it truly is an awful gun to have in this tank. So if you're first time with this tank, I would not consider it at all. I would get the engine and the tracks first with this tank, because this tank is all about mobility. This tank is not about doing huge amounts of damage. This tank is about getting Confederate badges, about getting scouting badges, about getting patrol duty badges. So therefore, get the engine and the tracks first. But when you do get the top gun, your AP has 157mm of pen, APCR 221mm of pen. And what's interesting is there's only two shell types. You don't get HE. You get HE with the other guns, but not with the top gun, which is kind of odd, right? Although with those low pen numbers, it's probably not too much of a loss, but still, it's nice to have those options. But it does make shell management very easy. Plus, muzzle velocity is 5221, and it's only slightly higher at 1638 with APCR, so again, makes shell management easy. The derp gun, forget about it for now. Handles like a car with no steering wheel, or like a three-legged horse. It is just fucking awful. Leave it alone for right now. But with the top gun, the gun handling index, the G index is 13.115, so it's really good, particularly for tier 6. So it's an accurate gun. It lacks a bit on pen, of course, but the gun itself is accurate and has decent gun handling. Now you've got 9 degrees of gun depression. Take note of this. This is unusual for German tanks, and its elevation is 20, so it's excellent gun alignment. If you don't know what gun alignment is, it's basically the ease with which you can align your gun with enemy tanks, and on this tank it's very good. It does 65 kilometers per hour in forward speed, 22 in reverse. It also has an excellent power to weight ratio and great traverse, so it is agile, nimble, it is maneuverable, it is a good brawler. And here's the other kicker with this tank, its concealment numbers. At 278 meter view range, which is the best in its tier, the enemy tank needs to get within 214 meters of you to spot you up, even when you're moving, because light tanks have the same concealment numbers when they move as when they're still. When you fire, it's 256, but basically that means that most tanks have a 30 to 40 meter disadvantage over you. Some of them even have a 50 meter disadvantage over you, so it's great for spotting and scouting. Now let's have a look at the armor. This tank does have a bit of armor. For a light tank it does, and it used to actually have more, which is used to bounce so many shots, which is why you were able to play it so effectively. Now you can see it still has a bit of armor up front. The turret, by the way, has that big gun mantlet which can't be penned. So combined with that small turret, it means that it's very effective, and particularly when you consider the gun depression, it means you can go hull down in this tank. 9 degrees gun depression on a German light tank is fantastic. So that's one option in this tank. But really, you should assume though that you're going to get penned in this tank all the time. If you can bounce shots off it, particularly when you're fast moving and you're a small target, which you will get some bounces, they're a bonus, right? But you shouldn't play for them. You should assume you're going to get penned all the time, because it's a very lightly armed tank overall. Particularly when you consider some of the big monsters that are out there. And you need to be really careful if there's a smasher on the other team, if you get up tiered, and obviously a KV2. But a smasher in particular can one-shot you. KV2 can one-shot you if he's lucky, but he's going to do a lot of damage. But if they're on the other team, or if there's a Stuart ML or anything with a big gun like that, you need to be careful, because you can lose a lot of hit points very early on. When I was shooting this, there were a lot of smashers on enemy teams, and I got one-shotted quite a few times. So you need to be very careful about that, particularly if up tiered. And that's the power creep in action that we spoke about earlier on, guys. Now in terms of tactics, this tank is your quintessential light tank, so you should be getting out there and spotting and scouting. You have that view range advantage over other tanks, even over other light tanks. So get out there and use your speed and your maneuverability, get out onto the flanks and spot up the enemy. You don't always have to fire off a round and give up your position, because you drop 40 meters of concealment when you fire. Spot up the enemy, get your Confederate badges, get your gold ribbons for helping your team do damage, and then after you've spotted up the enemy, then consider taking your shots, sniping, etc. It's also great at Circle of Death as well. Now let's have a look at some gameplay. Let's see this tank in action. We're going to have a look at Black Goldville. This is actually a mastery game in the VK2801, which I shot yesterday, I think, or the day before, I'm not sure. Now, as I said, this tank is a good tank. It's a good light tank. It's good at doing a good light tank job, but it does have significant disadvantages, right? And the fact that you could be one-shotted, the fact that they nerfed its gun and nerfed its maneuverability, means that it's a good tank. It's not unplayable, so if you looked at my Death Star review, my opinion is that tank is basically unplayable. Now this tank still has enough advantages to be playable, but it's certainly not the fantastic tank it was before, where it was the best tank in its tier by far, and definitely it's arguable that it was the best tank in Blitz. Now it's nowhere near that due to power creep. By the way, it hasn't just been power creeped, because if you think about power creep, that suggests that you stand still and the other tanks around you get more powerful, or they introduce new tanks which make you less effective. But this is not the pure definition of power creep, because they've also nerfed this tank, which they didn't really need to do, because if you're introducing power creep by making other tanks more effective, then you don't need to nerf the tank which is supposedly standing still. I know I'm being a bit pedantic here, but certainly this tank didn't need to be nerfed when you consider the other tanks that are now in this game. And you know, if a smasher gets a sight of you in this game, it's kablamo, game over, don't pass go, don't collect $200, you're just going back to garage. You know, but so just be aware that this tank is good, but certainly not as good as it used to be, and certainly not anything like as OP as it might have been in the past. You can see here the armor in play. It is possible when you're moving and creating those angles that you're going to get bounces, and you saw one there. But these are, I always look at these as a bonus. If you play for them, you're going to get disappointed because it's not basically a heavily armored tank. But anything you can get as a bonus, you can take. You can see here in Circle of Death, this tank is very effective. But what happened to me a couple of times in gameplay when I was shooting the footage for this was that I was circling death a tank like the AT7 there, for example. But somewhere else on the map, there's a smasher, and he just puts a round at the back of you, and then your game is over. Particularly happens if your heavies are not doing their job and engaging and seizing the key points on the map that they should be doing. And you know, I think during the event there is a lot of imbalance in teams. You get a lot of new players, a lot of inexperienced players, but that's just the way it is. It's always like that. Let's have a look at the vertical stabilizer in play. Here you can see the beauty of having vertical stabilizer installed. It allows you to make that shot while on the move and moving at top speed. Just bounce into cover there, and then I'm going to do the same thing again to the Digger Max. And again, that shows the beauty of having the vertical stabilizer installed in your equipment. Allows you to make those very accurate shots while moving at top speed. And this tank can shift. Nothing like it used to be able to shift, of course, but this tank can move. It is like shit off a shovel. Now, this game is very interesting game in that it's double mastery. It's a mastery for me and it's a mastery also for the Comet. So I know it happens sometimes, and I've featured a couple of videos where there's double masteries, but it's not so usual. Now here is the advantage of keeping your hit points until you need them, because you can see here against this Gravedigger, I can't really get around him. It's too tight a space, and he knows what he's doing until he pushes up, so I can't get a 360 line of Circle of Death on him. But what I do is I just make it more difficult for him. I just maneuver back and forth, and he bounces a couple of shots and I'm able to clear him off. So you know, and TK, he took off half my hit points, but I had them and I know that the game was almost over, so I was happy enough to give them up to clear him off. He's a very dangerous tank. You can see here the accuracy of the gun right into the one weak spot on the turret of the Tiger, and now we're going to clear him off, and another kill. And you'll see here then that this game was more or less a huge carry from me and the Comet, and a mastery for me, but also a mastery for the Comet. And you'll see here that our big carry on this, our flanking maneuver, and you can see here, I thought that actually his name was Egg on the Face at first glance, but it's actually Egon the Ace, so obviously he's a Ghostbusters fan. But congratulations, Egon, great job. You definitely busted those ghosts in that game. Well done, mate. So double mastery there, one for me and one for Egon the Ace, or Egg on the Face. Now, you see here though, if we look, the key point of this is the spotting, right? We spotted up so many of the enemy, and that's basically what you should be doing in this tank. You're not going to get mastery badges all the time, right? I mean, I featured a mastery game because I wanted to show you how effective the tank can be, and playing it to its optimal. So, you know, just like if you want to learn to play football, it's better off looking at Ronaldo or Messi than looking at me kicking the ball in the back garden, right? Now, game 2, I did tell you we would talk about the 105mm gun, right? This gun is just fucking awful. The handling is just dreadful. And I want you to I just wanted to show it to you. Do not put this gun on this tank. Keep the lower 75mm gun if you're until you're ready to get the top 75mm gun, because the gun handling on this is just dreadful. Now, unless you have a particular dislike for yourself and want to inflict some misery and pain on yourself, then don't get this gun. Gun handling is dreadful, the muzzle velocity is dreadful, its pen numbers are awful. You can see here, full on, what's that, a 30 plus DP roll. Can't pen anything with the AP. I mean, I have a couple of rounds loaded up in case I need something to push through a target. But, you know, you need heat and HE are going to be your main rounds. You can see, though, that when one of the HE rounds lands, it is a derp gun that does a lot of damage. And it's quite interesting to see the surprise on somebody's face when they're if they're in a brawl with you, and all of a sudden you smash them for 500, and they're kind of like thinking, "What the fuck?" Because they're not expecting that, because hardly anybody mounts this gun because it's just dreadful. You can see here the same shot I took last time, but this time I get a low roll. If you fire heat, it bounces a lot, even though heat's not supposed to bounce. It bounces a lot, and if you fire a P, you basically have a 99% chance of nothing happening, just firing a blank. You may as well be throwing fucking tennis balls at the enemy. Now, this is something you're gonna see very, very rarely in this tank, and this is a mastery game with this big derp gun mounted. I decided to play it for a day or a day and a half to see just what it was like, because I'd never mounted it before, and I just wanted to see what exactly is it like in this tank, just so I could share the experience with you. So my experience is this, guys, don't do it. Now, this may look like fun, and of course when you get a big roll on it, you think, yeah, definitely a sense of satisfaction, but believe me, this is one game out of 50. You know, 90% of the time you are going to not have a good game. You're going to have finished a lot of games with 0. You know, when you're up tiered in this tank, by the way, with this gun, some things you just can't pen at all, like a Tiger P, a Lycan, Smasher, unless you're right behind them, as you're going to be with this guy here. But normally you just can't pen at all with none of the shells that you have. Then you couple that with the poor gun handling, terrible muzzle velocity, and you're going to just not have a good time. You're going to see here a typical shot with this gun. So I'm going to try to snap one off to see if I can clear it off and get this extra kill and get the Radley Walters. And you can see there, I don't even know where the fuck that shell went. It's probably still travelling out across the English Channel. And then you got such a long reload as well that somebody else clears them off. So, but you know, of course it's possible to have a good game, but believe me, you don't want to mount this gun. Also, it kind of takes away from your role as being a scout and all that, because you can't really go out and scout and snipe, because the gun is just so bad. As I said, it handles like a 3-legged horse or a 2-legged dog. It's just awful. So please avoid that, unless, as I said, you really don't like yourself, or if you have a friend in your clan that you don't like, you can recommend them and say, hey, Armoured Pants said you should mount this, it's great fun, and then he can have a few hours of suffering and you can sit back and have a giggle. But of course, I know my subscribers are not like that. You're all great people and would never dream of doing that to one of your fellow clanmates. Come to think of it now, I think I might just say that to my deputy clan lead, Jay DeGas, or even maybe the clan lead, Tipsy, because he's always game for a laugh, and he will definitely take that very well. Okay, so you know, looking back on this tank, and before we do the recap, you know, avoid this derp gun unless you know, really want to set yourself a challenge, or really don't like yourself or somebody else. You know, but it can be a bit of fun, but that's the odd occasion. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to enjoy it at all. So, you know, the role of this tank is basically that of a scout. You should be looking for scouting badges, patrol duty, and Confederate, and that's really what you want to be doing. You know, it is a good light tank, but it has been power creeped for sure, so it's definitely not OP. It is just a decent tank now, but it does have significant weaknesses. I will get the tracks and the engine first, because this tank is all about mobility. If it's not mobile, it's not in the game. It is fast and mobile when you have the upgraded tracks and engine, and the view range and concealment give it all the tools it needs for scouting, so get out there and use them. 75mm top gun has good gun handling. Stay away from the derp. just stick with the bottom 75mm gun until you're ready to get the top gun, because the derp gun is just awful. And as I said, only if you really don't like yourself, mount that. I would use supercharged refined gun and vertical stabilizer. You saw those in good effect on the first game on Black Goldville, and it's the best balance for this tank, I believe. You're a very small target, really low profile. Also with that gun depression, the gun mantle and small turret, it's difficult to hit, but you can be smashed by a smash or something else, so please be aware of those guys. Watch the light tank guide. There's a link in the description, as I said. And you know, just as I mentioned earlier, beware of those big guns, because you can be one-shotted and it's really frustrating. So just be aware of that. But this tank not only is it good in itself, but it's perfect training for the higher tiers. And if you train hard here, you'll be able to fight easier later on. It really is a quintessential light tank, in that it displays all of the characteristics that are typical of its genre. So, you know, maneuverability, agility, speed, camouflage numbers, camo, and view range. Now, the music, by the way, for those of you who are music lovers, is Wagner, Flight of the Valkyries on the first game, and on the second game it is Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee. Both two perfect pieces of music, and both with flight in their title, because this tank does fly. So thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it enjoyable, and I guess all that remains for me to say is pants off.